Massive welcome to everybody. Really happy to see you all. And yeah, welcome to the June grassroots call. I just can't believe we're halfway through 2023 already. So I hope the weather's been good where you are and that you're all enjoying the summer. If there's anybody on the call, if it's your first time, big welcome. My name's Naveed Chowdhury. I'm the head of campaigns at Results UK. Hope you'll find this next hour useful, and as a result of the discussion this evening, some people might feel motivated to take our campaign action, which is to help unlock access to essential vaccines for epidemic diseases, but more of that later. So I'll just start off in the normal way, if that's okay, by going through the housekeeping messages. So we're recording the call and we'll post the recording on our website for anyone who's missed it. So please do feel free to turn off your video if you'd rather not appear in the call. And we'll be posting it up in due course on the blog section of the website. And we'll include all the links and resources that have been shared in the chat box during the call. We're also using automatic captions, which you can turn on or off using the Zoom bar. And I think, yeah, and so yeah, if you keep yourself muted possibly during the call, that'd be great. And we can deal with any concerns or questions you have, just raise them in the chat box. Anyone would like to say hello or introduce yourself, please feel free. We'd love to know where people are calling in from. We've got a lot of regulars, but some new people as well. So welcome everybody, and just say hello if you'd like to.
Wait,
I can see that Abbas is on the call.
Hi Abbas, yes.
He was part of our introduction to the results. So it's really nice to see you.
thank you. Yeah, basically, I and my friend in the small party here in Cardiff, yeah, and I and my friend Dan, we enjoy with you today. Yeah.
Well, welcome both of you, and yeah, great to have you on the line from Cardiff.
Yes, we're both in Cardiff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started. And unless there's anyone else, anyone else who wants to say hello? Okay. Well, look, let's start off with the usual roundup, which I'll do. I'll try and keep it. I've got quite a lot actually. I'll try not to talk for too long. Thank you to everyone who took our May action. So that was about writing to the local media about connections between action to overcome poverty internationally and kind of current debates around asylum and immigration. Obviously, that's a pretty hot topic, and I don't know how comfortable people felt diving into this topic publicly. And maybe we'll hear a bit more about that in a minute when we do the roundup section of the call. We'd really love to hear your thoughts.
Sorry, Naveed. Sorry to jump in, disturbing you.
Please do.
Say, I mentioned to a few other people on the call, it's World Refugee Day on the 20th of June. So if some people still haven't actually done the task, there's still time to kind of do the task, get it on that hook of being World Refugee Day, June the 20th.
Thanks, Bentley. I hadn't clocked that at all. We might have done, but I hadn't. That's a really great shout, and we'll be watching out for stuff on our social media channel, actually. Thank you.
Okay.
Brilliantly well timed. Obviously, this is not our normal territory for results, but how we describe people facing poverty and exclusion in different countries around the world is obviously really important to us. And so we felt it was really important to stretch ourselves a bit beyond our usually obviously very targeted actions on things like health and education, but influencing the terms of the debate. So whether people are likely to be more or less sympathetic to the situations of anybody facing challenges in their lives is a crucial part of affecting the chances of our specific actions being successful. And obviously, many of us also believe that challenging negative stereotypes of people fleeing persecution is important in itself. We're just going to put an article in the chat box from the 10th of May, so just after our last conference call, which set out some of the concerns we've been voicing and shows that we're not by any means alone in the sector about speaking out about things like the illegal immigration bill, which is currently going through Parliament. The article is from Bond. You should be able to just see it there. In addition to that, Parliament's International Development Committee, so the body which scrutinises the government's work on international development, has asked for limits to be placed on how much the UK's official development assistance or aid budget gets spent domestically by the Home Office on supporting asylum seekers in the UK. Some Treasury officials officially responded that that's not currently affordable as other budgets aren't available. And again, we'll put that in the chat. It's quite an interesting document. This isn't unexpected, I'm afraid, though, of course, we were hoping for a different answer. But it is not all bad news on the ODA budget, I think. And whilst they're concerned that these unforeseen costs are making total ODA exceed 0.5% of the UK's gross national income, we're still seeing government statements that commit them to returning to 0.7% when it's affordable to do so. So that commitment hasn't been dropped. And thank you to those of you who've shared letters which you've received from government, which somewhere in the text reiterates that commitment. Of course, we still don't have any reason to believe that that's going to change anytime soon. So how valuable that commitment is, you be the judge. Last month, we also took heart from the Development Minister's remarks in a speech to Chatham House that were much more favourable to be seeing international development as a partnership between countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, rather than the negative rhetoric about a drain on the UK's financial resources. So Andrew Mitchell, the Minister, has continued to use this language since then, and has also expressed a desire to increase public support for international development. So, as I said a moment ago, this positive public discourse is really important if we're to gain resources and policy shifts for things we care about, such as improving health systems around the world. That's, I think, a good thing. So we shared that link to his speech last month, but if you haven't seen it and would like to read it for yourself, we'll put that link in the chat again. That's just gone in. Now, Andrew Mitchell stated that he wanted to see public support for international development to increase from around 30% of the population, so the level it's at roughly now, to around 70%. Now, that's very ambitious, and if it's going to happen, it will take several years, no doubt beyond the lifetime of this current Parliament. At Results, we definitely think we have our part to play through, for example, speaking to family and friends, contacting the media, and continuing to demonstrate to our elected representatives what you do month in, month out, that the public cares about this, and that there is actually support for government policies to help tackle poverty and inequality. So thank you for all that you do to continue this really important work. We know it's been a difficult few years with a government that often has felt that it's headed in the other direction. But if we keep our hands to the wheel, we can turn things around in the long run. In a few minutes, we'll be introducing our guest speaker, who will be able to speak about an important moment for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal on Health for All. And that's the high-level meetings, or HLMs, as we're going to call it, that will be held at the United Nations this September. We're hopefully going to have a chance to explore how such international moments can, if they're done right, provide a chance to make real progress. Between now and September, we really have an opportunity to move the dial on our health work, so I'm really looking forward to tonight's discussion. However, before we move on, I'd quickly like to just touch on our work on education. As some of you know, Results UK hosts the Send My Friend to School campaign, which enables young people in schools around the UK to campaign for global education. This year, they're continuing to highlight the situation of children caught up in emergencies, and they have written a policy report on this, which is unusually designed specifically to be used by young people themselves. I find this a really refreshing approach, actually, and we've published a blog post by one of their campaign champions. And again, we'll post that in the chat just because we think you might be interested to see it. It's from someone called Mia, who is 15 years old and lives in Haringey. And I think I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to hand over to Aurora to share a bit about the activities that have been happening around the UK in the last month.
Thank you, Naveed. And hi, everyone. So for those who don't know me yet, I'm Aurora Basso. I'm the campaigns coordinator at Results. And if you have recently joined us, well, then welcome. You probably have been in touch with me already through the Join at Results email. And You can always reach me personally under aurorabasso@results.org.uk, which Naveed will put in the chat. And yeah, I'm always here to support you, and it's also always really, really nice to receive emails from you with the actions that you've taken. It's such a pleasure to read them. And yeah, now goes a compilation of those things that you've been up to around the country. So Andrew in London, he's always very active and has been recently on a peace walk by a different organization. It was organized, but I thought it was quite nice to highlight because it was recommended to him by Marcella, which is also part of our network and lives in Somerset. So I thought that was quite nice, those connections. And at the walk, he also invited some people along to our conference. So the national conference, which I'm super excited about, in case you haven't heard about it yet, it's going to be a grassroots conference on the 15th, 16th, and 17th of July, which is a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday here in London. And we'll share a link in the chat if you haven't already got your free tickets. Go over there and get them. It's going to be really, really cool. And I can already share with you a little sneak peek of the things that we're going to have coming up for the conference. Very exclusive. You get to hear it first. So we'll have workshops on how to engage your MP, how to build a successful campaign, which is actually going to be a youth-led creative campaigning workshop by these campaigning champions from Send My Friend to School, which is the organization that Naveed had just mentioned before. We're also going to have a session on a media training and things like that, so that you can become even better campaigners and get those skills, be really confident in your skills. And we'll have, apart from those more classic workshops, we'll also have panels and discussions that are quite different from maybe previous years or even the topics that Results normally campaigns on. So we'll have, for example, a panel on free school meals and another one on environmental justice. So it's going to be quite interesting to also see people from different sectors that, like you are, grassroots campaigners. So yeah, look out for some emails in the coming days and weeks where we'll be able to share more on the speakers that are going to come as soon as they confirmations come in. And on the Monday, on the 17th, we'll have the advocacy workshop, the advocacy day, which is going to be the classic advocacy day in Whitehall in Westminster, where I'll get to have meetings with civil servants from the FCDO, and also, which is a Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and also meet with MPs. And these meetings will prepare you for them, but they'll be led by you campaigners. So this is a really exciting opportunity for those of you who want to get more involved in advocacy or understand the UK's work in international development a bit better. So that is it for now on the conference. I'll pass on to the actions that you've done recently. So thank you for those that took last month action. It was, as Naveed said, supporting vulnerable people at home and abroad. And I haven't seen it yet. There's a link now in the chat. So we know that some people have written to their newspaper and were published, like Helen and Reg in Paul, to do 2 different papers. And Karen in Scotland, just very recently, I saw her email today, wrote to The Guardian, which is quite exciting. So hopefully that comes out. She picked up on a really good, she picked a really good hook for that, I thought. And yeah, thank you, Bentley. I think it's still a great opportunity to do more in the end of the month on that.
Aurora, I didn't tell you this, but I wrote to the Herald as well today. So we, Karen and I have been waiting all month for a decent hook, and suddenly 2 came along in one day. So, but I don't know whether we've got either of them published, but there we go. We've published them, sent them off anyway.
That's really great. I love that. That's really good to know. And maybe you both or anyone else would like to share how that was, if you felt it was easy or hard, or if you thought it went well, then what challenges you encountered.
We've got a saved web page that we've had for a long time, actually, which was something that went up in the Guardian saying how to write a good letter. And if we'd been thinking straight, we would have circulated that around the Scotland group. So apologies to all our Scotland group friends for not having done that. So basically we got that out, and if you just Google the article and you'll find the paper has a, if you want to write a letter, click here. So it's how to do it is fairly easy. And mostly it's about including your home address, your full details, and keeping your letter pithy, so about 250 words. So yeah, having found the hook, it wasn't too hard, was it?
Yeah, well, what I've done is I wrote a letter some time ago and then had it ready for any hook that I saw, because I did find this letter quite difficult and therefore time consuming to write. And if you see a hook, then you really need to sort of do it straight away. So it helped that when I then went to write it today, I already had a skeleton letter that I could then adapt to fit the hook. And in fact, later in this evening, I've seen the same hook in the Scotsman. So a similar letter is about to go to the Scotsman.
Right.
So,
That's really great. I love that. And I think I have found that article that you mentioned. I've shared it in the
Yes.
chat. I hope it's the right one.
it was in the editorial in the Guardian, yes.
Maybe this one was from the letters. I'll look for it further and see if I can
Yep.
circulate that. I think that is a really
Oh, that
good
one, yes, yes.
with that one. Amazing.
That looks like it, yes. Yes, what you put, yes, a Guardian advice on how to write letters. I think that's probably it, yes.
That is really great. And also to have a letter already prepared for when you find the hook. That's really excellent advice. Thank you. Just to move us on, although I know that more of you will have had your experiences with this month's action. So if you want to write me any kind of feedback on what you found about it, if you would have like more support, or if it was challenging, or if you really liked it, let me know. You can always email me. So I wanted to also mention that last month, in the middle of last month, we had the quarterly group leaders call, which we used to call group leaders call, where we discussed how to improve accessibility to new people, and we also shared as results our new thinking on leadership around groups. So we're looking to slowly move away from talking about group leaders as such and focusing more on spreading the responsibility of the group more widely, and aiming to kind of train and support multiple organizers. But this of course doesn't mean that if you are a group leader and you love it and it's working great for your group, that you need to move away from that, of course. So yes, we're just trying to support more people to take a more active role, and also take a bit of the weight off some people that thought it was too much responsibility just for one person. And it's now going to be called the quarterly group organizers meeting, and it's going to be open to all of those that are eager to get more involved in organizing inside of their groups. So in that spirit, the Brighton group now has a Google group, which is kind of like a forum similar to what Scotland has. Alex and Mira have decided to take a step back as leaders and just be regular campaigners and make space for others to organize now. So yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to them for all the hard work they had done and engaged in the past year. And one of the things, they recently got a reply letter signed by Andrew Mitchell from a response on the tuberculosis asks that they had done in February and March from that action. Which already makes it the third reply that we are aware of on this topic. And I think that's a really crucial step in pushing this issue to the forefront of the minister's mind. And also a thank you I wanted to say to Cameron from Manchester and Kerry from Birmingham for their really long service as group leaders. Although I'm not, none of them are on the call. Otherwise I would have given them some opportunity to speak. But yes, yeah, that is, I think, it on my part. And I'll now pass you back to Naveed to introduce the speaker for this evening.
Thank you, Aurora. That's great. So let's introduce the topic for the discussion this evening and our speaker. I've already mentioned these forthcoming high-level meetings at the UN, and there are going to be 3 of them. One on tuberculosis, or TB, one on universal health coverage, or UHC for short, and one on pandemic preparedness, prevention and response, or PPPR. Sorry for all these acronyms. We try to avoid them where we can, but if there's anything we don't explain, please do ask as we go through. Without going too far into the arcane world of UN negotiations and diplomatic missions and the like, we're going to explore how this moment helps us, and particularly in relation to vaccine development for epidemic diseases, which many of you will have taken action on in April. Thank you to everyone who wrote for the Prime Minister, and we've now seen 2 replies that you've received from his office, so thank you to Kathy and Karen. There may be more, but those 2 I'm aware of. We unfortunately didn't see any new resources committed at the G7 last month, which is why we're continuing to pile on the political pressure this month by also raising it with MPs. So thank you for everything you can do to keep the campaign going until we actually gain the resources that are needed to fund these vital research and development efforts. So to help us get into this topic, it is my pleasure to welcome Becky Knowles to this call. Becky, are you there? I think I saw you earlier.
Hi, yes, I am. Sorry, my camera's just, there it is.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'll just do a very quick introduction, and then Becky may want to say a little bit more about herself. Becky is from the International Pandemic Preparedness Secretariat, which is an independent and time-limited entity established to support the delivery of the so-called 100 Days mission, which I know she's going to explain in a minute. So the IPPS catalyzes scientific exchange and facilitates multidisciplinary engagement throughout the complex pandemic preparedness ecosystem. And Becky has previously led a portfolio of activities to mobilize infectious disease surveillance, research and policy at Wellcome, and has experience on antimicrobial resistance policy evaluation at global and national levels from time she spent at the World Health Organization and also the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So a real technical expert. Becky, very welcome to the call, and many thanks for joining us this evening.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and great to meet you all.
So you've heard a little bit about what people get up to already, but let me just introduce you to the people you're speaking to. So we have, as you can see, grassroots volunteers from all around the UK, some of who've been campaigning on global poverty issues for years and years, and some people who are brand new to results. In a minute, we're going to move to some pre-arranged questions, which we've shared with you to get the discussion started. But before that, we have a tradition to hear a little bit of information about our guest speaker and how you came to be involved in the work that you do. So I wonder if you could just introduce yourself and say a bit about your own journey and sort of getting into this work on public health issues.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, great to be surrounded by so many grassroots people as well. It's a great area to be in. So I guess I've always been interested in like health and public health, but quickly figured out that I was not going to be a medic. I do not like clinical stuff at all, but I was still fascinated by it. And so I did a master's in epidemiology, and this was pre-pandemic. So before anybody knew what epidemiology was, it was kind of, I got all sorts of funny looks when people asked me, oh, do you work on skin? Do you work on these funny things? I was like, no, it's about diseases and tracking things. And then from there, I just loved thinking about actually how do diseases spread and what are the sort of both the, I guess, the scientific and the social side of it. So actually what can we do is at the population level, what sort of non-pharmaceutical interventions, so like behavior, and you'll have seen loads of these in COVID, like masks and social distancing, but what triggers disease and what things like that. So then I was fortunate enough to spend some time out at WHO, And yeah, as Navida said, worked on like antimicrobial resistance policy. So that's more about how bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. So the drugs that we have are becoming less effective. So mobilizing at the sort of the national level, what like countries, what can we do to get stuff done around that and help protect antibiotics for as long as possible. And then spent a bit of time in the NHS, more on the front line, doing sort of data things, I guess is the best way of describing it. And then came to Wellcome and timed it perfectly for a pandemic. So not planned, but it's been really interesting, and it's nice to be around sort of such current live topics.
Thank you. It's always lovely to hear what fires people up about the work they do. So in this area. So thank you for that. Let's get straight into the first of the questions before we open up to the floor. And I think it's coming from Scotland, if I'm right.
Yes, Naveed. Hi, Becky. It's Bentley here.
Hi, Bentley.
Hi. What exactly is entailed in pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response?
Yeah, so great question, and it's a bit of a mouthful of a phrase, I have to admit. So PPPR is a multi-sectoral thing, and it involves numerous components. Broadly, it's about having the right processes and mechanisms and structures in place to reduce the risk and impact of an infectious disease outbreak at a global scale. So if we focus at like the moment an outbreak is declared, it's about thinking, what do we need in that instant? So there are some specific tangible things. So like we firstly need to know who has the disease. That's where the diagnostic tools come in. And you'll see these we got very used to these in COVID times with lateral flows and PCR tests, and diagnostics were sort of fast tracked and made very mainstream. So then if we have the diagnostics, we can find and track the disease, so we know who has it. And that information is collected and analysed to tell us how it is spreading and to identify any patterns that can help us stop this disease in its tracks. And that's what surveillance does. And at the moment, I guess, the surveillance system is quite fragmented with very sort of disease-specific silo systems that don't really talk to each other, as well as like country level or local level systems that don't integrate up to a regional or global picture when it comes to tracking disease. So if we know who has the disease and where it is spreading and how it is spreading, whilst that's really useful information, it's only helpful if we actually act on it and do something with that information. So that's where things like therapeutics and vaccines come in. So therapeutics are drugs and other treatments to make sure that the people who are the most ill get treated during a pandemic or an outbreak. And often those need to be developed, hopefully not from scratch. Hopefully we have like an arsenal in our background, and I'll come on to that in a minute as well. But so it's sort of, we also need to know what is effective, whether it's like repurposing old therapeutics for new purposes. So we need to test if they're effective against the outbreak using clinical trials. And then we need to ensure the right system in place to make sure those drugs get to market quickly without risking safety, but making sure they're accessible to everyone. So these are sort of like the firefighting activities. They're dealing with an infectious disease happening right in front of us. But prevention is often better than a cure. So we often also need those vaccines to ensure people are immune from getting infected and then limit the spread. So those diagnostic therapeutics and vaccines are sort of the main thing my team works on at the moment. So the International Pandemic Preparedness Secretariat, which is another mouthful of a phrase. So I guess there's specific elements we need in place, but to enable each of those things, we need a whole ecosystem for pandemic preparedness and response. And that includes having strong governance, financing and accountability systems. Often, for example, and this is coming from a bit of my background as a research funder, some countries don't have financial systems in place ready to receive large amounts of funding at the time of a crisis. And also donors also have their very specific mandates that they are guided by. So can only fund specific things or specific countries. So at the moment, it's kind of like, I kind of think of it as like a patchwork quilt when it comes to PPI. You've got all these little things. They're all a little bit fragmented, but together they need to be stitched up a bit better. Whether that's the funding, whether it's the tools, whether it's technology and governance and accountability, so that the quilt is there and ready, which we can use as a resource when the time is right.
Thank you. That's so much in there which we can unpack later in the conversation. Really good summary. I'm just hearing you speak, thinking about if that's fragmented and complex in one country, what's that mean globally? I mean, I was just thinking about what you said about surveillance. We know that some countries, it's really hard, but we've learned a lot from, for example, the way that was done in Nigeria during the Ebola outbreak, which made that country much better prepared in a way than some of the other neighbouring countries. So it's really complex, really interesting global picture. I really like the way you use the word patchwork for that. We'll get into it some more in a minute, but let's move on to the second pre-prepared question, which I think is from London.
Yes, it's from me. Hello, Becky. Thanks for coming along this evening. I think you might have partly answered this question, but we know that there's an ambition to produce new vaccines for potential pandemic diseases in 100 days. Can you tell us why this should be a priority for PPPR?
Yes, definitely. So for those not familiar with the 100 Days mission, it is essentially conceived in recognition of the fact that the first 100 days of a pandemic are critical to altering its course with the potential number of lives lost and economic damage done. So if we take COVID as another example, it was amazing that we got the first vaccine, COVID vaccines in 326 days. But history would look very differently if that had been at the 100-day mark and these products had been able to reach most affected communities all around the world far more rapidly than they did. So the 100 Days mission is seeking to ensure we prepare as much as possible so that we have diagnostics, therapeutics, and particularly vaccines ready to scale up within 100 days. And I think the 100 days is not a target, it's not a metric that we're actively measuring, but it's a shared ambition. So we may not make it in 100 days every time, but it's attempting to be far better prepared than we are at the moment. And it's important to also mention that the 100 days is not about risking safety and efficacy of products. It's not putting speed over safety at all. It's about speed and safety together. And it's about doing the marathon before the sprint. So it's what can we do now in what some people call peacetime, where it's sort of like the calm bit in between inter-pandemic periods. What can we get done now so that when there is a threat, we can act really quickly within 100 days? And this concept originally came up in 2021 and was endorsed by the G7 leaders who asked their scientific advisors to report on implementation around the 100 Days mission. And so they produced a report and recommended a time-limited secretariat and a scientific and technology expert group to be established. And that's where we come in. We became that secretariat to sort of support that implementation. And so we split our time between political advocacy and community and supporting our community of implementation partners. So that's CEPI and FIND, who are diagnostics, and UnitAid, and working with other advocacy networks. So the 100 Days mission is supporting preparedness through three sort of main buckets of actions. Firstly, it's about investing in research and development to fill gaps in the vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostic arsenal. So that's about understanding where we are in the current pipeline. So what vaccines are where, in various stages of clinical development for priority pathogens, and where there are gaps, whether that's a gap in funding or a gap in technology, and encouraging the development of tools around that. So one of the things we're thinking about is how can we support the development of vaccine libraries against pathogens. So, and working with viral families. So if we have a set of tools that they have something in common as a viral family, and then when we know exactly what virus is popping up, can we pivot it really quickly? So we have that sort of foundation there. Secondly, it's about embedding best practice and preparation into business as usual activities. So that's including the better surveillance, better networked randomized control trials, more efficient regulatory processes, and making sure that there's manufacturing capacity that is more regional. I guess at the moment we sort of have we have a few hubs of manufacturing capacity in largely high-income countries and China and India, but it's not the African continent, for example, doesn't have much in terms of manufacturing capacity, and that really slows down response. So making it more equitable. And then thirdly, agreeing different rules of the road in a pandemic so that no time is wasted at the start of an outbreak, sort of negotiating the basics. So thinking about like pre-agreed financing mechanisms to ensure that we can scale up vaccines really quickly, as well as guidance on like supply chains and data sharing and other things like that. So whilst we work in those are sort of like, I guess, 3 buckets, and we use the 100 Days Mission as a galvanizing banner to unite partners around an ambition. So hopefully this will be like the marathon before the sprint. And yeah, I think I can talk more about what we do in particular, but we work closely with our partners, but yeah.
Thank you. I mean, again, there's an awful lot in that. Those 3 buckets contain a huge amount of technical detail, and thank you for sort of outlining it for us really succinctly. I think the next question was supposed to be from Manchester, but I'm not sure we've got anyone on the line from Manchester. Can I just check if someone's here? Okay, so I think I'm going to ask the question myself in that case. So that technical detail, I mean, a lot of people on this call are very used to hearing about the insider details of some quite complex health issues. But essentially, we're advocates, and so we want to turn this into something that we can do about it. Particularly for, you mentioned equity, and the access of people are all around the world to some of these things. So the question is really, how can these UN high-level meetings that were mentioned earlier help achieve that 100 Days mission? What's the relevance? Why now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think when we talk about these HLMs, the high-level meetings, it's useful to see them in the context of everything going on of other meetings as well. So this year is a really big year for PPR, and HLMs are sort of one part of that. So we have various G7 and G20 negotiations happening. In Geneva, we've got the WHO leading international health regulations negotiations, and IMB, international negotiating body negotiations as well. So it's kind of, we're thinking quite strategically about where to go into each one. But HLMs have a particular advantage in that I think there's probably, again, 3 main areas. Firstly, they enable the topic to be talked about beyond the health sector to address things. I think a lot of health conversations easily get wrapped up in Geneva at WHO and stay very much within like one sector, one organization. But we saw in COVID that for many people, the worst effects weren't necessarily the health effects. It was more the economic, educational, human rights losses and things like that. So while the Geneva negotiations hammer out those country obligations and responsibilities for health capacities, the higher level engagement at these HLMs is really required to sort of address the totality of pandemic related needs. And it's the main situation where there's all 193 countries. So whilst you have the G7 and G20 discussions, which have been great, and for example, India this year in the G20 has been really ambitious in PPR, and they can those conversations can raise the profile of things to help things be adopted at the HLM. So they sort of work in tangent, but you need those HLMs to get everyone on board beyond health. Secondly, it means it's a place where you can sort of get those discussions going at the sort of heads of state level as well. And and which can result in sort of more action-orientated political declarations that can really help commit heads of state to improving governmental and multilateral capacities required to sort of identify and contain a global health emergency. So often in the health space, the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly conversations, they're mainly at the health minister sort of level, so they're not necessarily the leader of a country. So it can be difficult to get any traction beyond that. So that's where if you go to New York for the HLMs, that's when that traction comes. So hopefully, I think this year we're hoping there'll be some sort of agreement to support a strengthened PPR landscape going forward, and hopefully enable like long-term ownership and accountability as well. And then thirdly, as I've sort of touched on already, it's intended to really complement other negotiations ongoing at WHO. So the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body and the International Health Regulations negotiations, and they're quite thorny, technical issues, and they often get into like the weeds of things like intellectual property, and where progress can be made in like specific areas, but often like it can be difficult for member states to get their position across. So the two are very much complementary. They don't duplicate too much, and they really support each other. So the HLM is definitely there to really sort of bump up attention to pandemic PPR, get those longer term commitments, and sort of broaden it beyond the health sector.
Thank you. What I'm gaining from that is that yeah, that those are really critical technical conversations within the health sector absolutely have to happen, but that we also need that UN process to get the wider political attention to that, and that's absolutely the kind of stuff that we work on all the time. So thank you for those initial answers. There's such a lot in there, and I'm going to open to the floor. We've got a couple of things in the chat already, which I will read out from in a minute. We also thank you for those of you who've shared other stuff, such as letter writing guides. I can see a couple of them in there. We'll share all of those links when we put the recording up. Can I start off with just opening to anyone who wants to just ask a question verbally and just unmute yourself, and then I'll take maybe the first couple of questions from the chat box. Or I can just take the first question from the chat box, which is a technical one actually, or a very specific one. Pete has asked, what is your view on the £1 billion that the UK is paying Moderna for technology that has barely passed phase 1 testing? We may need to know what phase 1 testing is exactly, but is that something you can answer?
Yes, I don't know the specifics of this specific project, but I can comment on like phase 1 testing and funding in general. So phase 1 testing is sort of the preclinical side of a drug or like a therapeutic. So it's the really early stage. It's often small numbers of people involved, if people are involved at all. Sometimes it's like very lab-based research and preclinical development. So it's very early stage. And I guess the £1 billion is a significant amount of money, having not known too much about it. But that is a large investment, and I guess it's we have seen great successes from Moderna with the COVID vaccine, so that is a huge positive. And I think there's always a tricky bit when it comes to funding like drugs and vaccines, because we call it like the valley of death. Basically, there's a huge investment at the beginning, as to get vaccines through sort of those phase 1, phase 2, and sort of phase 3, but then most like vaccine manufacturing and like trials processes, that's when vaccines fail. So it's a bit of a risk always about like how far can we get a vaccine through, and it's about joining up the system all the way through. So it's about right at the early stage, how can we support something that's going to be able to get all the way through the system from like an early stage right the way up to manufacturing. So I think it's sort of, yeah, it's about seeing like the bigger picture. It's not necessarily like a one study that will solve everything, but it's about piecing it all together and building that ecosystem at the same time.
Thank you. I should have just put a number in the chat. So if anyone finds it easier, rather than to open the microphone or to type in the chat, if for whatever reason you can't do that, you're on a phone or something, you can text my number, which has just gone up on the screen, which is 07906 662 571. So if that's technically an easier way for you to ask your question, you can do it that way as well, and I'm keeping an eye on that as we go. The next, there's a nice couple of dual questions here from Jill, which I'm going to read out. What's the biggest success story you've had since you were set up? I'm guessing that's your organisation. And what is the biggest problem in achieving vaccine equity? I'm sure you've got lots, but can you think of the biggest one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Biggest success story. Firstly, so we're very new, I'd say. So Helwyn, my boss, who's sort of head of the Secretariat, she started in September, and then the rest of us joined basically April, May. So we're a pretty new organisation, or like team. I'd say our biggest success story so far has been establishing our scientific and technology expert group, our STEG. And we've really managed to collate a really diverse group of experts from all corners of the world. So we've got Latin America represented, we've got India, we've got the UK, the US, across Europe, and Africa as well. So it's really diverse, and China. And we've got sort of leaders in the field. So from lots of vaccines, lots of diagnostics, manufacturing. We've got people who are like on the front line doing COVID, in both in the lab and on the policy side. We have sort of the G7 health ministers, the G20 health ministers involved as well. And we sort of had our first sort of kickoff meeting about a month ago now, and it was just such a great atmosphere to have everyone really united. I think it's really rare that you get such influential people and like scientific minds, they're our brains basically, all together in one room, and they're all really motivated by this like 100 days mission to try, and it sort of aligned people into focus on one specific thing. And they've allowed us to completely sort of, we've tapped into their networks to get stuff done. So for example, over the summer, we're doing a series of listening exercises at the regional level. And we're using our STEG brains to identify who are the right organizations in various countries around the world, to really co-produce these listening exercises. So basically understand actually what does this 100 days mission, it's a very like G7 thing. It's quite a high level thing. What does that mean to people on the ground who are doing stuff, whether that's on the grassroots side, whether it's on the science side, public health side. And so our STEG have really helped get that going. So I think that's probably our main success so far. On the challenges of vaccine equity, this is a huge one. I think, to be honest, I think it's the manufacturing side of things. And as I think I touched on earlier, like there aren't enough hubs in low resource settings at the moment. We have sort of, the Indias of this world, with huge vaccine institutes, and the US and the UK and China. But then it becomes a problem of like, how do you ship vaccines and how do you get those supply chains and how do you just develop them so quickly enough? So we're trying to advocate for a model of more regional vaccines development. So can we set up hubs in like East and West Africa, in Southeast Asia and Latin America as well? And this is sort of, it's an early concept. So we're trying to work with other people to develop it a bit more. And I think one of the biggest risks with that is actually in the short term, those vaccines that are potentially developed in Africa will be more expensive than the vaccines that are developed in India, even when you take into account. So it's how can we encourage people to still buy the expensive ones whilst we're sort of in the capacity building stage to get things off the ground. but hopefully it will sort of work out in the long run if we have that capacity. And then it's also making sure that whenever there is an outbreak, that high-income countries don't not steal, that's the wrong word, but grab everything. I've been looking at mpox today, where it's like when the outbreak was declared last year, and the US and the UK, well, mainly the US, stockpiled all the vaccines. So there wasn't really enough available for Africa at all. So it's about sort of doing those negotiations now so that we can sort of keep people calm and prevent that from happening in the future.
Thank you. That word we always use, equity, it sounds very tidy, doesn't it? But it's actually huge, isn't it? That injustice of the rich world doing what it can because it's got the money, and that inability of countries not to achieve what they need to for their populations, not because they haven't got the expertise, but because they're not listened to or because the infrastructure isn't there. And I really loved what you were saying about bringing all of those different voices together. We certainly see in our work that there's some of our partners are amazing at showing how the expertise actually is there in all different regions of the world, and we just need to listen to that and facilitate that. And so that seems to me a really powerful part of the work that you're doing. And thank you for sort of building out and expressing a bit of what equity really means for people who, for our ability to save basically lives at the end of the day. We've got 6 or 7 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to just anyone just coming off their mic if they would like to. We have a couple more questions in the chat, but has anyone got a question that's been kind of spurred from what you've just heard over the last couple of minutes? I know he's had a question already, but I'm going to ask this next one from Pete in the chat. How can we best move the action forward? I'm interpreting that as, well, Pete, you can speak for yourself, but we're advocates. We want to help you do the job that you do. We want to help make this situation better. How can public pressure and the kinds of things that we can do help?
That's exactly what I mean.
Thanks, Pete. I was hoping I got it right.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, to be honest, for us, it's about simple, strong messages, I think, is the main thing, and advocating upwards. So like that's why we're using like the 100 days, because it's quite a catchy unifying thing. So I think it's about arguing for, like, demonstrating what that means to you all on the ground. We know what 100 days might mean for us in terms of the manufacturing or the negotiations at the UN level, but it's a gap in terms of what does this look like if we're in a pandemic again and things are getting going. How are we going to ensure that those vaccines are available for people on the ground, and actually what would the priorities be? And I think if we can like package it up and sell it as like one story, coming at it from different angles, completely fine, but using that sort of, how can we mobilize things within 100 days, and what can people on the ground really do, whether that's like we saw in COVID with all the volunteers that came forward. What resources do we need for those volunteers to come forward? Do we need better, like with all the sort of, whether it was people volunteering for clinical trials or helping out with vaccine jabbing in people's arms, or doing the sort of the shopping for people who can leave the house? How can we enable those things better so that we can, as a whole system and as a whole sort of united body, achieve those 100 days better?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it, Pete.
Yeah, my question was, what can we as an advocacy group do to help move the action forward as advocates, as lobbyists? Yeah,
well, I'd throw the specifics back to you. You guys are the experts in this, and I think we would value any sort of contacting your sort of, as I heard at the beginning, you guys contacting your MPs and raising it up that way. I think we can do some of the legwork, but it's often really, you need that people voice, if that makes sense, which you guys provide. And yeah, lobbying prime ministers and sort of getting behind those, sort of telling the person's story and the grassroots story, I think is a very powerful message. So it's mobilizing your communities, writing in, speaking up, really sort of communicating that message from your perspective.
Thank you.
I've just thrown into the chat the link to our action materials. They're in the usual place, which felt like the right time to do it. Our suggestion this month is that you contact your MP, and there's all sorts of other things you could do, and it's your choice. But we think that is kind of the next steps. Having tried to contact the Prime Minister directly, now we think piling the pressure on through the MPs is an important one. We've got only a couple of minutes left, but I can see Kathy has her hand up, so I'm going to hand it over to Kathy.
Sorry, with a couple of minutes left. Actually, it was something that Becky mentioned about having done her work on antimicrobial resistance. And I actually just really wanted to know a little bit about whether you see any of the problems from the because that's another issue that we've looked at in the past in results, and whether that has any impact on the preparedness, because in some ways the concern is that there won't be the medication, and particularly antibiotics, for pandemics in the future. And have you seen a link between your past job and your present?
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing for me is sort of giving country ownership to addressing AMR. It's about sort of there's a limit to how far you can get from really top-down global messages, and actually, if you bake things in from sort of the national or even more local level, you can really make a difference. And we've seen that on both pandemics and AMR. And I guess the other thing as well is we were able to respond really quickly in COVID because we had sort of it didn't just happen. People have been researching and developing vaccines for coronaviruses for decades. And so it was just that research and development was already there. And yes, it could have been a bit quicker, but we got it going. And that is the main thing that's struggling with AMR at the moment, is investing in antibiotic development is not a great economic proposition. There's no economic incentives for pharma companies to do that. So we're trying to change that narrative. And from COVID, we can really now demonstrate that actually, if you have that wealth of investment already in a research and development system, it can really pivot really quickly, so that we are better prepared. So I think that's probably the main thing.
Thank you. I'm going to call it to an end there. We've got a couple more questions in the chat which we haven't had time to address. One of them at least looks like it might need a long answer. I'm going to send those to Becky and get answers back to you on those. And sorry we didn't get round to absolutely everything. Becky, a massive thank you for sharing your expert knowledge with us this evening and really explaining how I think what's our part in this really complex web of technical things that we need to achieve. We're really grateful that there are experts like you and your colleagues who can achieve the things that we need to as a global community and flag up to us as advocates the things that we can do to help. So that is really amazing. And thank you, Jill, for the reminder of World Refugee Day and sharing on that. And thank you for Bentley for the reminder about that. So we put the link to this month's materials in the chat, as I say, and you should have received a link to that anyway, and it would have been in your inboxes on Friday. One last important announcement, which is because we've got the national conference on the 15th and 16th of July, the grassroots team in results isn't able to plan the usual July campaign action at the same time. It would break us, I'm afraid. They're a bit too close together. So what this means is that we're not going to be producing separate action materials for July, and there won't be a July conference call on the usual first Tuesday, the 4th of July. That's cancelled. I'm sorry about that. It does give you a bit more time to take this month's action. However, having said that, there's an event in Parliament that we'd like to invite MPs to on the 12th of July, and that invitation is linked to in the action materials. So if you are able to take action before then, there's an event specifically for parliamentarians. Other people can go along as well, but we particularly want to reach parliamentarians. So if you're up for going yourself, you would be put on a long list, a waiting list. But go and have a look at that, and if you can invite your MP to that action, it's very much about the things that we've just been talking about tonight. It's about the importance of research and development and why the government needs to put resources behind that to achieve the 100 days mission that we've been talking about tonight. But apart from that, there's no particular deadline on getting those MPs to write to the government and putting pressure behind this important topic that we've been hearing about. So we are really looking forward to seeing many of you in person at the conference. And then after that, the next of these regular online conference calls will now be on Tuesday, the 1st of August at the usual time of 8 p.m. So as always, it's been really great to see you all tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.